Happy Friday, it's October the 14th and this is The Big Story. I'm Chao Suen. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel to stay up to date with our live news updates. Singapore's GST hike will go ahead as planned in January. But given higher than expected inflation, the government will review the measures to offset its impact, with details to be out in next year's budget. It comes as Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Lawrence Wong today announced a new $1.5 billion support package to give Singaporean households additional help to deal with inflation that is expected to stay high until at least the middle of next year.
While we have this uncertain inflation outlook, our spending needs are very certain. They are just going up year by year. It is going to be very hard for us to time our revenue-raising measures with the uncertain inflation outlook. So we think, having looked at the matter, that a more responsible approach is to proceed with the GST increase so that we can secure the revenues we need for our growing expenditure needs, but make sure that we offset the impact of the GST increase on Singaporeans, cushion the impact, and especially for the lower and middle income Singaporeans, we will make sure that they are well taken care of and the offsets are there. And that's why, as I mentioned just now, we will update our assurance package to take into account higher inflation.
Now, is Singapore at risk of falling into a recession next year? Given the challenging economic outlook, Deputy PM and Finance Minister Lawrence Wong says he's watching developments both here and abroad, and the government will respond if needed.
We still are forecasting growth for 2023 as of now. Nevertheless, we continue to monitor the situation carefully, particularly the external environment. What happens in the EU, US, China, for example, the three big growth engines will have an impact on our local economy as well. So where growth is concerned, if there are indications that the growth outlook will start to weaken further, or for that matter, indications of more disruptions to come which will impact on growth momentum both externally and Singapore, even the risk of recession going up, then obviously we have a different set of drawer plans. Not inflation related, not about helping cost of living, but it's more about concerns about jobs, unemployment going up, and what we might do to help stave off the risk and impact of recession. That's a different set of drawer plans which we are also thinking about and monitoring very closely.
Well, just this morning, the Monetary Authority of Singapore warned of considerable uncertainty around the outlook for both inflation and growth. MAS tightened monetary policy for the fifth time in 12 months, allowing the Singapore dollar to strengthen to make imports cheaper. MAS now expects core inflation to remain high through the first half of next year, after revising its view that prices would peak in the fourth quarter of this year. Meanwhile, GDP beat expectations to grow 4.4% year-on-year in the third quarter and avoided a technical recession on a quarter-to-quarter basis. And joining us now is Irvin Seah, Senior Economist at DBS. Thanks for joining us today, Irvin. So what can we expect next year? MAS says GDP growth will come in below trend, while core inflation will stay elevated. Does that mean we should brace ourselves for a bumpy ride in 2023?
Yes, indeed. Judging from the economic conditions in the external environment and some of the high-frequency data that we have, it certainly looks like we are heading into a rough patch as we move into 2023. In our opinion, the economic growth momentum is likely to ease further, and inflation will continue to stay elevated. There is a likelihood that inflation probably may peak sometime towards the tail end of the year, but I wouldn't want to pin too high hope on that because ultimately the global inflationary pressures remain very high. Food prices, commodity prices, energy prices continue to stay elevated. And furthermore, we also have to be mindful that there are two main factors that is weighing down on economic growth outlook for Singapore in the medium term. First, the US Federal Reserve has continued to tighten monetary policy. has continued to raise interest rate. Now, tighter monetary conditions will definitely weigh down on the consumer demand. And on top of that, obviously, with high inflation, it definitely will erode consumer sentiments. Secondly, China. China is definitely slowing down. Economic momentum has shown very visible signs of slowdown, partly because of its onerous COVID measures. Now, as long as China continues to maintain its zero COVID policy, its own domestic demand will remain weak, and that in turn will have some spillover impact on Singapore's export performance and also overall growth performance heading into 2023.
So it sounds like a whole lot of doom and gloom, and frankly, I think we're all quite worried. But what actually does this mean for consumers like myself? How can Singaporeans navigate these uncertain times?
Yes, indeed, it will be challenging for many of us, as we head into 2023. And I would strongly advise everyone to live within their means, right? Try to cut down on discretionary spending because, prices are continuing to stay high. And yet we have also seen, signs that wage growth is actually lagging behind inflation growth. In other words, by and large, a big majority of Singaporeans have actually experienced a negative real wage growth. In other words, the wage growth actually is falling behind inflation, and henceforth, in terms of purchasing power, I think that has been diluted because of high inflation. So do think twice before you make any big ticket purchase, particularly when it comes to things such as cars, properties. You also have to be mindful that mortgage rate has been rising. So therefore, do your math carefully before you go ahead to make those big ticket purchase.
So this is MAS's fifth tightening in just 1 year. Historically, is this exceptional? And does it look like there will be easing anytime soon?
Yes, indeed. This is definitely an unprecedented trend that we've seen. And obviously, this came about because of the extraordinary circumstances that we're currently in. Now, inflation is definitely, a big risk for the Singapore economy and also for the global economy. Now, whether the MAS will continue to tighten or will they ease policy going into 2023, I think much really depends on the data in the coming quarters. Now, for the MAS to ease monetary policy, one of the key conditions is that there could be a risk of the Singapore economy heading into a recession. Only under that kind of circumstances will the MAS start to ease monetary policy. So we have to bear that in mind. There is also a possibility that MAS may actually normalize its monetary policy. In other words, basically allowing, essentially to stop tightening the exchange rate policy. Now, that essentially will imply that inflation has peaked. So in other words, if inflation starts to peak, the MAS will stop tightening monetary policy. Will it ease monetary policy? Much really depends on will the Singapore economy head into a recession or not. Now, with regards to these final questions, will Singapore economy head into a recession or not? I think the situation is getting a little bit dicey. In fact, today we have revised now our growth forecast for the Singapore economy down to 2.2%. Now, this is down from 3% previously. At 2% level, there is a 50-50 chance that the economy could potentially head into a technical recession in 2 of the quarters in a year. So we have to bear in mind that the risk on growth is also rising.
Thank you, Irvin, for your valuable insight. This has been Irvin Seah, Senior Economist at DBS. Vaccination centres here are once again a hive of activity as the Moderna Spikevax vaccine is being offered starting today. The Straits Times visited the Kaki Bukit Joint Testing and Vaccination Centre, one of the 9 JTVCs offering the bivalent vaccine, earlier this morning. Some people told ST that they wanted the shot as it targets 2 variants of the virus, hence conferring better protection. Others said it was for greater peace of mind, given the rising infection numbers recently. Those aged 50 and up, whose last COVID-19 vaccine jab was at least 5 months ago, may walk into any of the 9 JTVCs offering the new vaccine to get their shot. And speaking of COVID-19, the Health Ministry has instructed the Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, or POFMA office, to issue correction directions to Thailand Medical News, opposition politician Goh Meng Seng, People's Power Party and Hardware Zone Forum. This after they either posted or shared an article claiming that increased disease severity of COVID-19 in Singapore is becoming a common occurrence, even in the fully vaccinated. The article also claimed that mortuaries, funeral parlours and crematoria are facing a pile-up in cases. These claims are false. A man who was originally charged with the murder of 19-year-old Felicia Teo, 13 years after she went missing, was today sentenced to 26 months jail for lesser charges. Ahmad Daniel Muhammad Rafai admitted to 4 charges, including unlawfully depositing Ms. Teo's corpse in a public place and giving false evidence to 2 police officers. But after factoring in remission, Ahmad Daniel will likely not have to serve more jail time, as he had spent more than 1.5 years in remand. Meanwhile, details of the case were also revealed in court today. In the early morning of June 30th, 2007, Ahmad Daniel, Ms. Teo and Mr. Raju Putra Sitya Sukmarajana, Ahmad Daniel's supposed accomplice, returned to Mr. Raju's flat in Marine Terrace after a party at La Salle. The trio consumed ecstasy inside the flat. Sometime before 6 a.m., Ms. Teo died due to unknown circumstances. Ahmad Daniel and Mr. Rajil then came up with a plan to dispose of her body, as they did not want to get into trouble for drug consumption. They placed her body on a mattress and covered it with another mattress before cleaning up the unit. That same day, the 2 men went to hardware stores to buy tools to dispose of the body. They placed the body in a carton box, sealed it with tape, and brought it to the ground floor of the block via the stairs to avoid security cameras at the lift lobby. They then took a cab to the Punggol Track 24 with the carton box containing her body. At a deserted location there, they dug a hole in the ground and placed the box in the hole before pouring kerosene over it and lighting it on fire. After the fire died down, they covered the hole and left. The case was later classified as a missing persons case, but when new evidence emerged in 2020, investigations restarted. In handing down the sentence today, the judge said that Ahmad Daniel's act had resulted in perversion of justice for over 13 years, and that the 26-month sentence was proportionate and would send a deterrent signal. And those are our top stories for today. Visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Chao Suen, and we'll see you next week on The Big Story.